Greetings, IAM mentors. I'm very pleased today to introduce Simrat Gill. She is actually has ties to our efforts from early on. She was the president of the Minority Association of Pre-Health Students when she was an undergrad at the University of Washington, and now is co-president of the Student National Medical Association. While she's currently about to start her second year at the University of Washington. So thank you so much, Simrat, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I just wanted to start off. So, we are going to be helping our mentees sort of on this healthcare journey. And how early should applicants get started and thinking about the process? How do you get organized in applying to medical school?
Mm-hmm. I think it's really hard to give a definitive answer to that question, given how variable kind of everyone's timeline is, everyone's motivation is. For example, one of my classmates, she actually was a civil engineer. She did a PhD in engineering and then switched gears to medicine versus, you may have someone who knows that they want to be a doctor at 12 years old. So it really the timeline will really depend on kind of your personal experiences and when you have that first realization or that inkling that, medicine might be something that I want to explore, medicine might be something that I want to pursue. So I think it might be better to kind of frame it in terms of the kind of different phases of how do you go about kind of exploring your possible passion for medicine. So like I said, the first thing is just that intuition, like, hey, maybe I like science, maybe I like being in patient care settings. And then I think the second element to really think about from that point onwards is the kind of academic component to it. You can major in anything you want. It doesn't have to be a science-related major. You can major in dance, anthropology, as long as you complete the prerequisites. And there's a set list of prerequisites such as, general chemistry, OChem, physics. So you just have to find a way to kind of complete those prerequisites regardless of what you major in. And then of course, the second part of the kind of academic-y requirements is taking the MCAT, which is a standardized test that you have to take before medical school. And I would say another huge phase of really going about, thinking about applying to medical school is the clinical exploration phase, which honestly just seems like every year the kind of bar is just getting higher and higher. So what that means is having some kind of clinical exposure, because I feel like medical schools really want applicants who understand the general gist of medicine. Of course, not all the nuances and details, but understanding that medicine is the right fit for them, understanding, not only the kind of pros of being a doctor, but what are some of the downsides of being a physician and what are the hardships that come with being in medicine. And a lot of paths that students often pursue are things like scribing. I personally was a medical interpreter, which was a great experience to get, both the patient side of things, but also the physician side as well. A lot of students also do things like EMT training or research or any kind of other leadership positions within medicine. So that is the kind of other big element, I would say. And then lastly is just, kind of putting it all together and putting your experiences down on that piece of paper and submitting the application. So, timeline, it can vary. Some folks are able to do this within a couple of years. Some folks, it takes them 5 to 6 years. But it's just, once you get started, it doesn't have to be consequential. You can do these things simultaneously while you're studying for the MCAT. You can work part-time as well. So it's just extremely variable.
I love how you brought up sort of the uniqueness of everyone's experience too, that, you don't all have to come from a science background. You don't all have to have known from a very early age that you necessarily wanted to do this, that there's like different points that you can kind of hop on to the journey and still make it work and still sort of bring your own wonderfully unique perspective to be, you're a great doctor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks. And then how did you sort of go about deciding what schools to apply to?
Yeah, another great question. For me, I think some of the top priorities were one, location in terms of proximity to my family. I think for me, I was a little bit biased towards the West Coast and wanting to stay on the West Coast, but also a location in a big city. And I think that was important to me because one, having just diversity around me. I know for my mental health, I would have fared well in an environment where I regularly see people who look like me, whether it's other students or professors, or the patients that I serve. And I kind of knew, or, before starting medical school, that I wanted to serve under, kind of help urban underserved populations. So kind of being in a big city made sense in terms of the clinical exposures that I would get. Another kind of huge element that I was looking at were what opportunities does a medical school offer in terms of service learning opportunities and research as well. Those were two things that I was also very interested in. And the way I kind of gathered all this information was honestly just, kind of going on their websites. But I will say, just reading their mission statements, every school's mission statement sounds very similar. It's a little bit generic, but they do try to put some more details about the different kind of programs and different kind of service learning opportunities that they offer. Another, tuition, of course, is another element that, a lot of students consider out of state versus in-state. Scholarships. Public schools tend to have less scholarships than private schools. What other factors? Oh,
I was just going to say, and I believe on either it's the AAMC or maybe the MCAS website, does it have some of that general information for students?
It does, but it's
details?
very general. I would
Okay.
say, honestly, the best way to find this information is actually going onto the school's website. Their website will have a lot more information than, AAMC will have. And to your point about kind of looking at those general websites, there's something called MSAR, which is a medical school, I think, admissions requirement, which I recommend everyone to purchase. I think it was $20 when I purchased, but I think it may have gone up now. What that offers is just a very general but quick snapshot of what admission into that school looks like. So for example, how many letter recommendations do they want? What is their kind of average GPA MCAT? That was a huge kind of limiting factor, I would say, in terms of me when I was forming my list. If I saw, so they show you the GPA and MCAT requirements in different quartiles. And, if I fell in the 25th percent or less, I was like, okay, maybe not that school, lesser chances there. So that was also another kind of huge thing that I had to consider while making my list, was the median MCAT and GPA.
Yeah. And that's probably just a good resource as well to know like what schools might be present in a geographical area, since there's, sometimes there's like schools that you may not have heard of, right? That are in an area you're looking at and you're like, oh, I didn't even know that school existed in that area. And so you can sort of broaden sort of what you're looking at too.
Yeah, MSAR will have a comprehensive list of all medical schools in the US.
Great. Thank you. And then, medical school is a little daunting because there's a lot of different expenses associated with it. What are some of the various expenses, and is there any resources that you came across to help sort of students with the process?
Yeah. Short one-line answer, it's very expensive, very, very expensive, and unfortunately a barrier for many, many students. And I'll just start. I'll tell you both the kind of trivial expenses, but even the larger one. So starting with the MCAT. So there's a $320 kind of registration / taking the MCAT fee. But along with that comes the kind of money that goes into MCAT prep materials. And that can range from anywhere from $100, if you're trying to get the kind of bare minimum, all the way to $2,000, depending on how extensive you want your MCAT prep to be. After the MCAT comes, submitting your primary application, which is kind of the big application that you send to all schools that you want to apply to. And the one-time fee for that is $130 plus $40 for each school that you're applying to. So for example, if you're applying to 20 schools, you can imagine 20 times 40 plus that 130. So that is the primary application. Then comes the secondary application. So what the secondary application is, if your school kind of likes your primary application, which includes your personal statement and your letter of recommendations, they'll send you their secondary, which is more kind of tailored to each individual school. So for example, University of Washington secondary will look very different than, Dartmouth or Georgetown's. And those can range from anywhere from $35, that was my least expensive one, to $120 per secondary. So as you can imagine, cost increase depending on how many schools you apply to. Applying to 5 versus 20 is going to be kind of a huge difference, but a lot. So okay, so applications are done. Now, when I applied, we had in-person interviews. So then comes all the flights, all the hotels / Airbnbs, all the food while you're out. For me, I never used a suit before med school. So, buying a suit. So, just little things that add up. And I would say I spent, if not more, at least $5,000, if not more. And just to kind of give you a reference, I applied to 25 schools, which I know sounds like a lot, but that honestly is becoming the kind of new norm. And I feel like it's only going to go up, just things are just getting competitive year by year. So, applying to 25, 30 schools is nothing out of the ordinary these days. So yeah, a lot of expenses. As far as resources, the main one that I know is the fee assistance program offered by AAMC. And I believe the requirement for that program is you have to be 400% below the poverty line. And, you have to submit your tax documentation, your parents' tax documentation. And if you're deemed eligible, then some benefits are you'll get a reduced MCAT fee. They'll offer free AAMC prep materials. And I believe the kind of primary, secondary fees are also reduced with that. But if you don't qualify for that, there's no other financial assistance that I know that's that robust. Some other kind of cost saving techniques would be either loaning MCAT prep books from if there are centers within your university or even public libraries. I've seen MCAT prep books there. When you're traveling, some medical students at the school that you're flying to will offer to kind of, let you stay for a couple of days, so you don't have to pay for hotels. But yeah, not many options that I know of apart from these.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then just sort of going back to when we were talking about the MCAT, that's sort of one of the big, also intimidating parts of applying to medical school. How did you go about preparing and studying for it?
Yeah, I would say there are 2 main phases of MCAT studying. One is they refer to it as content review, where you're just trying to either recall or try to learn new concepts for the first time. So, that can just look like watching videos online or just reading textbooks. And I personally use the Kaplan prep books, but I can tell you, it's a business. There are so many prep companies out there, and they're pretty similar, I would say. It's just honestly a personal preference. A lot of people like Princeton better than Kaplan, but I personally use Kaplan prep books, and they are pretty much just almost like textbooks, and they'll have chapters for each subject that will be tested on. So I spent a month or 2 just reviewing content, but I feel like the more important part is actually practicing, and that includes practicing questions. You can know the content very well, but it's not going to serve you too well if you're not comfortable with the testing part of it. It's an 8-hour long exam. That's not something that, we're naturally accustomed to. So training yourself for that, I would sit in a library every day or every Saturday for 8 hours and simulate exactly how the real exam would go. So, no talking to anybody, taking only the designated breaks that I would be allowed on the real exam day to really give myself the experience and get comfortable with the timing. So I would just say practice, practice, practice. If there was one thing I could go back and change was just, focusing less on content review, because it feels like you're never going to remember every single detail, but, just kind of understanding the patterns of the way they phrase their questions or the types of questions they ask. I felt that was very important.
And you must have had a number of different iterations of a practice test then that you would kind of go through.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me that. So I used a couple of the Kaplan practice exams, which I didn't feel like really simulated the real exam well. The number one, the gold star standard, I would say, are the ones that AAMC offers, which makes sense because they're the ones who, kind of make the exam. So I would say those for my kind of last month to really gauge how I am doing. And I will say, you'll hear a lot of students say this, what you score on the practice exams are a pretty good indication of what you'll score on the test day. And AMC offers about 4 full-length practice exams.
Wow.
Yes,
That's a
yeah,
great reason. And
yeah,
are those
yeah.
free tests that they
They are
offer?
not, no. So that
Okay,
would be, that's one cost associated. So
I
that was
see.
something I had
Okay,
to
I
be.
think there's one maybe that's free, right? You can
That's
get
one,
one,
yeah, one's free, and then the 3 main ones you have to buy.
but that's a good tip. Just maybe that's a good
Yeah,
use of your
yeah.
Money.
If I were
You're
to
not,
if
yeah,
I were to prioritize something, if you're kind of debating where to spend the money on, AAMC 100%.
I see.
Yeah,
Good. And I love that you would actually like sit down and
yeah,
do the same timed breaks. And I think that's a really good tip too, to like simulate the test day. And so
yeah,
it's that part of it then is stress-free kind of when you walk in.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's just building the stamina that we're not accustomed to because we don't have 8 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That's a long time. I mean, much longer than you would sit in class for a lecture. So
absolutely. Yeah.
thank you. And then, I think one area that the mentors will get asked for help a lot is, writing a personal statement, getting started, proofreading it, giving feedback. What maybe advice do you have for the mentor group in that regard?
Yeah, I would say, kind of encourage reflection on the student's part. Um, you only have 5,300 characters, and it feels like putting your life down into 500 words, and trying to explain your motivation for medicine. That can seem very daunting, but I feel like if you've done really kind of insightful introspective reflection beforehand, you'll really be able to narrow it down to the most meaningful experiences that you've had that really showcase who you are as a person, and really kind of authentically present your motivation for medicine. One thing I would say is that I feel like a lot of students feel pressured to sound unique, and they want to kind of stand out. But you have to realize a lot of us, we do have the same underlying reasons of being into medicine. We like science, or we like, or we might be inspired by a family member's illness, and that's okay. But just know that your context and your lived experiences automatically are going to be different than the person next to you who's applying. So just be authentic to yourself. I feel like a lot of folks feel like they have to embellish or kind of add something
Mhm.
extra to really stand out, but just kind of being true to yourself. I that's just, it's easy on you, and I feel like it just comes across as being more genuine and not feeling like you have to portray yourself in a certain way to get accepted into medical school.
Yeah, that's
Um,
also wonderful advice. Yeah, honesty and
yeah,
passion over
yeah,
necessarily like you need
yeah,
to be the one out of 1,000 that you're
exactly.
saying something specific.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just feeling confident that your lived experiences, by default are going to be different than everyone else's, and just really making sure you're able to highlight those in your personal statement. Another tip I would say is just encouraging students that, of course, a lot of students end up sending their personal statements to family members, friends, mentors for editing, but just doing that in a kind of time conscious way, and understanding that, the person that you're sending your statement to is very busy. They won't be, if you send it last minute, they're not going to get
Mhm.
back to you within a day. And even if they do, that might not be the most kind of thorough editing job that they're able to do. So just being cognizant of the other person's time. And yeah, I think those are the kind of big tips that I have for personal statements.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then how did you decide who to ask for like letters of recommendation?
Yeah, I think my overarching goal with letter recommendations was, and I think I can confidently say something that medical schools also look for, is avoiding a generic letter, and really aiming for that personalized, individualized letter. And I feel like that will come naturally if you kind of have a longitudinal relationship with whoever, the professor or your supervisor that you've been working with. So I chose, for professors, I chose professors who I may have taken more than a quarter, or professors who I know I consciously made an effort to get to know them and give them the chance to know me. So
Mhm.
I would go to their office hours. And at a school like UW, where my class sizes range anywhere from 200 to 700, you can imagine how hard it is to kind of make yourself known to the professor or kind of make yourself memorable to the professor. To give you one example, I took a physics class starting in the early beginning of, or the late 2017, so late 2017, but I did not apply to medical school until 2019. So I made sure I stayed in touch with that professor from 2017 to 2019, whether it was just kind of an intermittent like, hi, how are you doing? Hey, I'm still here, or just meeting with them for coffee to kind of discuss the details of your letter and updating them on what you've been doing in your life since then, because they don't know, what your kind of path has looked like since then. And just kind of really letting them know that you're very much invested in putting in the effort, so they get to know you and they can write the most kind of individualized, tailored letter to you. What other character? Just having those kind of longitudinal relationships, I would say, is the number one characteristic, kind of criteria that I would aim for. And I think another really helpful thing that I did was, with each letter writer, I set up a meeting with them, just to talk about the letter and talk about, is there anything that you need from me to make this the strongest letter that you can write? And a lot of them will say, yes, can you please send me your personal statement? Can you please send me your resume? Can you please send me, let's just chat about what are some things that you want me to highlight in your letter. So, that really gives you the autonomy to in a way, kind of shape what kind of positive highlights that they might want to write in your letter. So I felt, that really helped with the meeting. Plus also, a little bit of assurance that, it was going to be a strong letter. And then the last tip that I would have was, in my emails, when I reached out most of my professors via email, I didn't just say, can you write me a letter? I purposely said, can you write me a strong / enthusiastic letter of recommendation? And I also gave them the out, because I feel like sometimes professors, they may not be comfortable writing you a letter, but, they might feel pressure. But, if you write in your email, hey, if you're feeling uncomfortable, like, please feel free to say no. I completely understand if you don't feel like you're in the position to write me a strong letter. So you offering them that out, I feel like, just kind of helps them be honest as well about their ability to write you a letter.
Yeah, those are great tips, because then if they say yes, that you're going to get a strong letter out of it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, if I were to rate letters, there's a positive letter, then you have the neutral kind of generic letter. But the worst thing that can really happen, which I feel is a red flag, is if they accidentally write something, not accidentally, but they just don't realize, and it comes off negative.
Yeah.
That is a huge red flag.
Yeah. Or if it looks like it was like cut and paste or anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I love that you met with them so that they could see sort of outside of the little slice that they knew of you, that, there's probably a lot of other things that emphasize their opinion of you, and that they were able to include in the letter, probably.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then I think another area that the mentors will get asked for, potentially for assistance a lot, is interviews. Like, how would you recommend that they help the students prepare for interviews, or advice they should give them?
I think something I mentioned earlier too is just reflection. Sitting down and just reflecting on your most meaningful experiences, your most impactful experiences, kind of life lessons, or kind of turning points where you felt like, okay, this was very important in shaping my motivation for medicine, or very important for kind of making me the person that I am today. So of course, with every medical school interview is going to be different. You can never anticipate every single question that they're going to ask, but there are some questions that you have like a 95% chance of being asked, such as, why medicine? Why our school? How do you plan on managing stress in medical school? So if you just do a quick Google search of common medical school questions, you don't have to buy a resource. I just quickly searched these questions on Google. You'll get a whole list of possible questions you can get asked. So just kind of making notes and jotting down thoughts. Another kind of, so like I said, if you reflect, I almost had a bullet point list in my head of, okay, this was a patient experience that I really remember. I remember this was a shadowing experience where I learned this is how you work really well in a team. So when there was a question being asked related to teamwork, I was really quickly able to kind of put that, pull that out of my kind of mental toolbox because I'd reflected on it. So I didn't feel like I was put on the spot. So I would just say, making a list, literally a written list of really impactful experiences that you've had. A lot of folks do mock interviews. I unfortunately didn't have the time to do mock interviews, but I have conducted them. So I've seen how helpful it has been for others. And that's not only to get them exposure to different questions, but also just seeing, and we recorded these on Zoom. So they were able to kind of see how, their kind of presentation style, or, are they looking at the camera, eye contact, are they smiling? So you're just kind of body language things as well. Those are kind of minor details that, often kind of go above our head, but, they do matter at the end of the day. Another tip I would say is just getting familiarized with the school's interview format. So a lot of schools that I did interviews at, every school was just different. So, UW, for example, does a 3-person panel, which can be a little bit intimidating, and their interview was very formal, versus another school that I did it at, it was just a quick one-on-one 20-minute, versus there's a format that's becoming quite common now. You may have heard of it, MMIs, which are multiple mini interviews. And those are almost like stations. So you go station to station, and every station is about 5 to 7 minutes. And they are kind of more looking at your situational awareness, I would say, and your kind of ethical insight into medicine, and just trying to get to know you, kind of your viewpoints, how you're able to critically think about situations. So that's a little bit different than your traditional, like, okay, tell me about your experiences. So just knowing what the school is expecting beforehand and preparing for the different formats that might be thrown at you.
Good, thank you. And I love the theme of reflection that you sort of weaved in and out of a lot of the answers. I think that is something that also just shows a certain maturity of like thinking about your experiences going into medicine. And it's something that, you're going to have to do sort of lifelong in a health career. So I think that's a really good advice. Thanks. I mean, then just, is there sort of anything else that you would advise that you'd offer up to the mentors as they're helping the students on this journey?
I think it's just the fact that, they're interested in knowing about this process, and, the fact that I'm doing this right now, and, they're trying to get as much insight into this process. I think that's huge. One thing that I know that I cannot even state the value of it, was just having the mentorship that I had along the way, and how significant it was to my progress. I feel like I'm a product of mentorship. This is a very long, overwhelming, really tiring journey, but having people there for you, especially people who look like you, people who understand your lived experiences. I just can't, state the value of how helpful that is, and just offering, being there, offering your support, and just listening to the concerns of students, because I can't, super challenging journey.
Well, thank you so much, Simrat, for all your advice and for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you.